Welcome to I Like Beer, the book club, where we discuss great books while drinking beer. That's it, beer and books. A couple of friends. I'm your host, Jeff Spanier. With me is co-host of the I Like Beer, the podcast, affectionately nicknamed The Talent, Jeff Riccitelli.
All right, happy to be back.
And our book and beer friend, author, Ryan Woldt.
Hey guys, you both sound super enthusiastic today, and I'm here for it.
You pumped us up with this book. On the I Like Beer podcast, we've been covering North County breweries, specifically San Marcos, California, over the last month. Several field trips, amazing beers, stories to share. That's what we do on I Like Beer, the podcast. Great beers and the stories that go with them. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts. And what have you been up to, Ryan?
I've only got two things that I'm focused on right now. By the time this episode airs, I will have released my newest book, Future Eli and Jane, which is the continuation of a book we talked about once, Eli and Jane.
Congratulations.
Yep, and that'll be for sale. Just Google Future Eli and Jane or Google Ryan Woldt, you'll find it. And then the other big thing for me is the Roast West Coast Coffee podcast that I do, launches on Tuesday, October 6th, which I think will be, or October 5th, excuse me. And this show will probably be out after that as well. And so if you're interested in coffee and you like entrepreneurship, the Roast West Coast Coffee podcast can be found anywhere you find this show, Spotify, Apple. Actually, I think this show is on YouTube. I should learn what shows I'm on. I got too many shows going on.
And I learn every time I listen to Roast West Coast, I learn a little something more about coffee. And I thought I knew a thing or two, but kind of like our journey through beer talent, I learned more and more, like slurping coffee, good and should be socially acceptable.
Should be, yes.
Give us one more. What's something people may not know about drinking coffee?
Oh man, I've learned so many things. Recently I learned that coffee beans have like a natural coffee oil to them that contain cholesterol. And if you brew your coffee as a French press where you're steeping your ground up beans, that oil will stay in there. But if you're someone like me who's like, oh, I don't want to have as much cholesterol in my diet, you can run that coffee through a filter. Or if you just brew your coffee through a filter, it actually takes that cholesterol out. It actually takes those oils out, and you won't have that from a health perspective, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so I've been actually brewing my coffee in the morning as a French press, which is how I've always done it, and then running it through just like a little pour over filter. And I kind of think it makes my coffee taste a little smoother in the morning.
But also that's why camping coffee tastes so good, just percolated with no filters or anything.
Yeah,
my opinion.
Absolutely.
Hey, Jeff and I bonded years ago over our fondness for craft beer and telling stories. In fact, we spent a lot of time drinking beer and talking about books. Thought we were the only ones. Then we met Ryan and learned there was at least one more kindred soul, and someone's listening to this. So welcome. So here we are. I Like Beer, the book club. Once a month, we join powers, discuss a book, share some beer, rotating the host based on who has chosen the book. Ryan's turn this month, and the book is The Alchemist by Paolo Coelho. But before we turn the page, let's find out what we're drinking.
So today we're doing something new, which is we're all drinking the same beers. I don't think we've done that before. I was chatting with the team at Virgin Beer Company here in Carlsbad, and I said, hey, I talk to these guys about books every month. And they said, oh, do you drink beer? And I said, yes, we drink beer. They said, would you like some of our beer? And I said, yes, I would like some of your beer. So they were kind enough to give us a couple of cans of two of their new beer releases, their Tier 1 Pale Ale, which coincidentally is a San Diego Padres themed beer, and the one that I'm going to be drinking first. And I say coincidentally because I believe the Padres season just ended and the beer just came out.
It officially, but it's been over for a bit.
Officially ended. I think is what he said. It was officially ended. Unofficially ended a while ago.
So I'm starting the night off with this pale ale, and later on we'll be drinking their Bavarian Gold, a Helles Lager.
We have really come to like these beers from Virgin.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm saying I really enjoy. I'm looking for an excuse to maybe just go there. We should just record from there just so I can drink their beers.
Read the whole damn book there.
Yeah, no, and again, this is another one that I really like the fact. I mean, you open up the can and it just like, boom! It's like a flavor. The odors of the hops and everything coming out. It just smells so good, and but it's really I think it's a really nice balanced pale ale again. You know, I mean, they've really created. What do you say? They're doing a great job with the crafting part of the craft beer thing, because I think their beers are exceptionally well crafted, and they're smooth. They have, you know, the flavors that you want, and you know, you don't get this. Sometimes you get with some of the aftertaste or like the overwhelming bitterness at the end of the pale ale here. It's really good.
They've brought the pale ale back.
Yep. They've got an entire campaign called Push for Pale, and they're committed to bringing out pale ales. This one is a collaboration with the hosts of the San Diego's 97.3 talk show, Ben and Woods, and they're big baseball fans. They gave me a little list here. Just you're mentioning the hops, and this one has 4 different hops in it: Citra, Mosaic, Chinook, and Nelson. So it's definitely packed full. And I think, Jeff, you just mentioned it, and I'm gonna throw it out there. If you listen to this version, we're saying right now, if you want to welcome us in to read books all day, then you know we're on board. We can't help you make the beer or anything, but we'll read books there.
We can bring the books. Yes, we can bring the books. You bring the beer, and let's we'll meet in the middle.
I think that might be my personal legend coming true right there.
That's right. Speaking of the book.
Well, cheers, everyone.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers. And we should talk about the book,
Let's do it.
which is The Alchemist. And so I would start by saying Maktub, gentlemen. I believe it's pronounced Maktub. I read this book for the first time last year, and I was really moved by it. I read it right at the beginning of the pandemic. I picked it up out of a local lending library. I'd always heard of it. Aaron Rodgers, Green Bay Packers quarterback, always talks about it. He reads it every year. And so I always hear about it. I'm a Wisconsin guy, and they always talk about how he's reading the book again. And so when I picked it up, I didn't really know what to expect. I certainly didn't get what I expected. But it was really an emotional experience reading it. It hit me really hard, the whole story. So I wanted to read it again now to see if I felt that same emotion on a reread, or if that was just kind of an overwhelmingness of the beginning of COVID, and I've since been beaten into submission by a bunch of COVIDiots, and just the never-endingness of all of this. And so that's why I suggested this book. And I thought, worst case scenario, we read a classic book, and best case scenario, I get the same kind of visceral emotional reaction out of it as I did the first time.
This is a book I've read multiple times. I've actually taught this book, so I was really excited when you brought it up. Is it's one I wanted to have teaching it isn't the same as having a discussion with it with peers or people whose literary scholarship you respect. It's different. Your job's to guide students through it. So I'm super excited you picked this book, and then we get to talk about it.
Yeah, I thought I had read it. I believe I've read some of his other stuff then. And as I started the book, I quickly realized I hadn't read it, but really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Paolo Coelho is kind of a crazy. He's got kind of a crazy story in his own right. This book that we're reading is a translation of his original. He's from Brazil. He had a dream to be a writer, and this book is kind of reflective of his own passion to do something. But he went to law school first. I was reading some of the notes about him, and just decided it wasn't for him. He began traveling. He became a songwriter, a successful one. He was in prison at one point by the military dictatorship in Brazil. He walked a 500-mile road in Spain. I mean, his story is really pretty incredible, and this, I think, is kind of a reflection of how he feels. He found his path in life, and I haven't spoken to him in person about it. But that's kind of my impression. And Jeff, since you've taught this book, would you mind giving us just a quick overview of the story before we jump into some questions?
Sure. It's sort of in some ways, a coming of age quest story. To give a real tip of the iceberg introduction to it. What are you getting yourself into? A young man, a shepherd who has big dreams, literal dreams, and then lofty dreams for himself, and decides to take the risks and take on accept the call to adventure and head on out. I know we'll get into some details of it, but I think that sort of sets a stage of the kind of book we're looking.
Yeah, our protagonist Santiago is kind of a wanderer, but he's guiding these sheep around the countryside of Andalusia, and that's what he does. He wakes up, he walks with his sheep, they find a new place to graze, he sleeps, he wakes up and he does it again. And along the way, he reads books and he, meets people in various towns. And in particular, he's headed towards a town where he had met a girl that he thought that he liked. And he was excited that that opportunity was coming up. And at that point, he has a dream right before he reaches this town. And he falls asleep in an old abandoned church underneath a tree that had grown up inside the church. And he has this dream that's been repeating of these pyramids in the desert. And it had happened enough times that he noticed that it was happening over and over again. And before we get into what, where that takes him, I'm wondering, at the beginning of this book, is there a future in which he's just a shepherd? How much of his life is guided by these sheep? And he asked that question: am I leading the sheep, or are they leading me? And so I'm wondering what you guys think about that, and how much of our own lives are actually directed by others or by the actions of others. How much of our own lives are I'm waking up and I'm doing this today, and how much of them are I'm waking up and I'm reacting to this today.
And the book's full of those kind of nuggets, right? That he's in charge of his sheep, he's been guiding the sheep, and then the curiosity of, wait a minute, who's really in charge here? I'm as much of a sheep run by ritual and tradition and not taking any risks as they are. I'm as set in my ways as the sheep. And it's full of those sorts of I won't even say that they're not mind-blowing philosophical moments, but they're the kind of philosophical moments that resonate with anyone. Is my career running me, or am I running my career?
Yeah, no, I would actually go that and say that they are in some ways mind-blowing, because what I really appreciated about this book is it is a very simple read. It's a very easy book to read, but it's so deep and so many layers. So depending on how you want to look at it and analyze it, I think people can take whatever they want to take out of it. And I found so many times where I stopped and I was like, wow, that was so profound what I just read. Yeah, it was so simple. And the point you're bringing right now is one of those things. Is it's at its surface you're reading the story of this shepherd, herding their sheep. But if you think about most of us, that's what most of us do. And like I said, in our daily life, that's what we do. And we get up, we do the same thing. We go to work, do the same thing. And then what, this kid has the dream and stuff, and then decides to pursue that dream. And so many of us maybe never make that step, or we think about how it'd be great if we just did this, right? Wouldn't it be great if we just did this? And we just don't have the guts to do it, or we just, for whatever reason, things happen, life happens, right? Maybe we can't do it because of financial, whatever it is. So it was just interesting. Like I said, you take a step back and you look at it through that lens and you go, wow, would I have the guts to do that? Provided that opportunity. And then you think about in your own life, well, I've had some of those opportunities. Did I seize them or did I not? So like I said, I just found it really interesting that I could look at this book on so many different levels and just feel that it, like I said, it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't one of those ones where I had to go back and reread and go, do I understand the words that this author, we read way back when, I was like, do I really understand what this, I think it was one about the tree. Like, did he try to spin it this way? It was just so simple, but so profound in what they did.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to convince you of how smart and how profound he was at any point. He was just telling you this is what was happening to this character. And I just went back and checked. This book was originally published in 1988. And so, and that's something that I think is really impressive about the book, is how well such a simple concept in the book holds up, despite the fact that we're all overwhelmed by information all the time. In the world of the internet, there are classics that don't hold up as well because we've been exposed to that. Films are another way, where if you didn't grow up with them to appreciate them, you might not get it now because you've seen so much more. You wouldn't realize how groundbreaking it was. And this book still kind of felt that way. It got really spiritual right away. And I at first thought it might be a father and son story, because in the very first few pages, he talks about how he had a chance to go a different way right away. His family thought he was going to be a priest. And when he told them not, it wasn't that, they wanted him to be a priest, but he could see in his father's eyes that he wished he had rebelled against his own, path, and he never did. And so it sets you up right away to see that this is something that not everyone does. Whatever is going to happen next is not something everyone does. There was a quote in the book in the very beginning. Santiago's reflecting about him, or they're reflecting about him, and he says, ever since he had been a child, he wanted to know the world, and this was much more important to him than knowing God and learning about man's sins. And that made me start thinking about spirituality and whether or not God and the world are the same thing in essence. And if that's part of what the story is. And it does feel that there's a theme of connectedness and what we'll get into shortly, which is fate.
We last book, Barbarian Days, we had a little discussion on the difference between spirituality and being religious. And it just seemed to me like this book handles that question or that difference. You can be religious and spiritual. You can also be spiritual without being religious. And this book seems to find a way to bridge that gap. It's a very spiritual book, but I don't feel at any point am I being driven toward a specific view other than belief in self and hope and things worth fighting for are worth fighting for.
Yeah, I was just gonna say 100% agree. I think it's extremely spiritual, but without being, it's not preaching. It's not preachy. It doesn't come off as trying to convert you to something or whatever else, which like I said, I found it personally, like I said, to be very profound in a lot of different ways.
That might be why it's so successful, is that anyone, a lot of the themes are themes that are found in all kinds of religions. And so you're not necessarily looking at it defensively from your own religion or offensively against another religion. And if you're not religious, that's okay too. It seems to appeal to all different groups. He meets in the very beginning, we're still kind of talking about that, how he gets started on this journey, and he's going to be taking this journey. He meets three people that kind of kickstart his whole thing. He meets a palm reader, a fortune teller who he asks about his dream, and she tells him that it means that he has a treasure out there somewhere, and he'll learn about his treasure at these pyramids he keeps seeing, which is crazy talk because he lives in Spain and there's no pyramids in Spain. Right. And then, almost immediately after that, he meets this old man, or what appears to be an old man, but might be a king, might be a god. We don't really know, might be some essence of the universe, but it appears as an old man to him. And he starts telling him about personal legends, and essentially that we all have this inner journey that is guided by God, by the stars, by the universe. And if we look for it, if we are open to it, it will tell us the direction our life is supposed to go. And those two characters really kickstart him and are what makes him decide that he's going to take this risk, even though he waffles, whether I should sell my sheep and go after this treasure or not. And right away he gets some reinforcement. He decides to do it. And it turns out that a friend wants to buy the sheep, and he gives him the money, and that his friend is following his own dream, and everything works out. And the old man tells him that's that's beginner's luck. It's essentially, you've opened yourself up and the world is rewarding you. So he gets on a boat, and he crosses from Spain into Africa, to Tangier, and he immediately gets robbed. And he thinks at the time someone's trying to help him, but instead they're actually robbing him. And I'm wondering, how do those kind of three interactions set up the rest of the story, where he gets positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and then this promise of future reward?
Do you want me to play English teacher for a minute?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I just asked a lot of questions there. I apologize.
When you read these things mythologically, we have a fortune teller that puts us in the mood for, all right, the fates, the three weird sisters, the fates, and we have a trifecta. We have the three. We have the fortune teller, who's no help, but she's also no harm. No foul, no harm, no foul. We have the mentor, who really doesn't do much other than guide him and push him, give him the kickstart. And then he has the reality check with, and now you've been jacked of everything. And that's how your journey begins. And as usual, those fates give you the blessing and the curse. They don't tell you the curse part. You're going to start it with nothing, including not even a crumb in your pocket to eat with.
Super interesting was this whole concept of personal legend. In fact, I was kind of I started using that phrase quite a bit over the weeks after I finished this to my wife. I'm on my personal legend right here. So But what I found really interesting about it, because I kind of was going back today and looking at it, is that whole concept of, you think, what is a personal legend? And the way that the old man explains it, it's what you've always wanted to accomplish. And everyone, when they are young, has this personal legend. And then as you get older, and things happen and everything else, it starts as time passes, a mysterious force begins to convince people that it's impossible for them to realize your personal legend. And so I found that really interesting, that idea, that concept, that when you're young, and we kind of have that here, you dream big. So much is possible. I can do so much. And yet, as you get older, and again, like life happens, for many people, they lose sight of those dreams, and because it's now no longer a thing. So I found that, too, like I said, just areas of this book that just really jumped out at me, and I thought that was super interesting. And then I think that again, going over and then getting robbed of everything kind of leads into some of the later concepts here. But again, it's like everything kind of happens for a reason, right? If that doesn't happen, then it doesn't set up the next parts of his journey. And we talked about fate, or we will talk about fate. But that kind of leads into that, is that it's what you do with that, right? Things happen to you. It's what you do when things happen to you, that really going to dictate where you go, and how whether it's something that you triumph over, or whether it's something that really does set you back, and you can't make it.
Well, and I'm going to say to Jeff, the English professor, he doesn't end up with nothing in his pocket. He has two stones,
right.
Yes.
named Urim and Thummim, which are essentially a black stone and a white stone, and the yin and the yang concept to some extent, that the old man gives to him and tells him will help guide him. They will tell him which way to go. Except he learns very quickly you're not supposed to depend on them. You have them, but you shouldn't use them. And so maybe we can jump into kind of the theme of fate through this. We learn right after he's waylaid in Tangier, after he gets robbed, he ends up working in this crystal shop for quite a long time. But in the beginning, the very first day, it's because he's just hungry and he needs someone to take pity on him. The shop owner, this concept of maktub, which translates to "it is written." It's a reflection of fate or destiny, the way things are meant to be, and it has this whole kind of opening of oneself up to the universe, which we've been talking about. But this is where it's a twist from maybe a more specific religious concept. Is the idea of maktub does not conflict with the concept of free will. So you still can make choices that affect where your path goes. There is a path for you, but you may not end up following it. And so I'm wondering how you guys feel about that. Do we believe in fate? Do we believe in destiny? Do we believe in this concept of maktub? And you're on the record. We're recording this.
Well, I'll go first on it. I feel like that, I use the phrase here, everything happens for a reason. And I think I've been known to say that a lot. My kids would probably, tell you that I say that a lot. But I think we use that expression a lot of times to, say, validate what happened. It's easier to say that afterwards, and so I think free will is still an important thing. What we are also, our actions are going to really dictate what ends up happening ultimately, right? In terms of the choices that we make and the things we go. So I did appreciate that there is some fate in here, but it really is dictated by choice.
It's almost a let the universe, let the world assist you.
Right.
Right. There are forces out there, again, to the spiritual part. There are people out there you're going to meet. There are things that will happen. Let those things assist you in the accomplishment of your dream, of your personal legend. They're there to help if you're smart enough to know how to look for them, listen for them, and allow them to help, even the bad things.
Right. Yeah, because sometimes those people can have a negative effect on what happens to us, right? It can go both ways with it. And again, that's where the free will is how you react to that. How do you handle that? What do you do with that?
And that quote that you read about, a mysterious force begins to convince them that it will be impossible for them to realize their personal legend. If you stop thinking of the free will part, I will accomplish these things, and then you let those things out in the universe that are trying to conspire to help you step on the dream and let it go, because I think we are hardwired as we get older to let go of things.
Right.
That's not possible. That just wasn't my path, or I'd have to give up too much for that.
Right.
I could never be in a beer drinking book club podcast.
I know. My own personal legend. So actually, I have a question just to add in. I know it's not my night for questions, but
No.
I did find, so going at this part of the book where he's in this crystal shop, and the concept of this thing called the soul of the world comes up, right? And the way it's explained is that the soul of the world is when you want something with all your heart, that's when you're the closest to the soul of the world. It says it's always a positive force. And so when I read that initially, I said, oh, that's kind of cool. But then I started thinking about, well, so if I really want that brand new car over there, am I now closest to the soul of the world? So you could take this and manipulate it in a bunch of different ways. And so I didn't know how you guys saw that.
Of course, the king would say, why do you want the car?
Right.
Well, I want the car because I want the freedom to go somewhere, or I want the car because I want the status that comes with the car. And then he'd say, why do you want the status? Why do you need that freedom? Is that not freedom you can find with your feet? I mean, that's the way this book works. You're like, oh, it's kind of simplistic, and then you go a little longer, and you go, not really. I think I just blew my own mind.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. This, like I said, this book on so many levels, you just start thinking about it. It just takes you down these kind of wormholes or rabbit holes. But just like yourself, just talking about it or thinking about it. And that's, like I said, I don't know. I can't think of too many books that I've read that are written so simply in terms of just a basic story, but that have so many multiple levels like this. That very impressive. And especially, I think the other point we didn't bring, I'm assuming this was probably originally written in Portuguese. So it's it's translated, and they did a great job even with that, because I've read plenty of books that have been translated and don't quite carry the same weight, that way. So
another thing about the Crystal Shop, that connecting back to a beer podcast, that I didn't get the first few times I read the book, is says the tea tastes better in the crystal glasses.
And we've had this conversation many times on our own podcast about beer tasting better in specific glassware for those beers. And so prior to us having those conversations, we would have never, that part would have just kind of gone right over our heads, right? But this time you got, oh, that makes a lot of sense now,
Well, but then the question becomes, does the beer taste better in the right glass, or do you just think it does because you've learned that that's the right glass that you're supposed to drink it out of?
Now you're blowing my mind again. So I don't know. I'm going to sit back and think about that. I'll contemplate that a couple times.
And I'm only saying that because last night I drank a beer that was supposed to be drunk out of a flute, out of a kind of a rounded flute, but I poured it into an old jelly jar.
Right.
And I think I enjoyed it just as much, but I can't be sure.
That's interesting.
I personally thinking about the whole through line of free will versus fate in the book, it kind of reminds me that of this concept that fate is kind of a fickle mistress. She's not always there for you when you need her, or you think you're being guided in the wrong direction, but sometimes that's the direction you need to get to in order to find your reward, the place you're going to be. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to open another beer. I'm ready to try the Bavarian House Lager, which I just wanted to throw out there. Mention is an Oktoberfest beer, and we are right in Oktoberfest season right now. After his time in the Crystal Shop, Santiago does this thing multiple times throughout the book where he kind of gets comfortable, or he kind of makes the decision to give up, and something pushes him through. He kind of changes his mind at the last minute. Something reminds him that he has this personal legend to follow, and almost as if the further along he gets, he doesn't need as much of a push to move forward, because he's like, I'm already this far. The world is conspiring against me to put me in a situation where I have to keep moving forward. So he joins a caravan to cross the desert, and the Sahara Desert, and he's going to encounter nature kind of for the first really big time. He's encountered nature as a shepherd often enough, but in a comforting way. But now he's going to be confronting nature and as a obstacle that he needs to survive, and then he's going to encounter war until he finally reaches this oasis. And along the way to get to this oasis, it's almost this epic journey in and of itself, and it's a reminder. I think in the book, I think it's being used as a reminder that, okay, you have your personal journey, you have this treasure that's out there, this legend. What are you willing to do to get there? The world isn't just going to give it to you. You need to prove that you are worthy. This idea that you are proving you are worthy, whether it's by achieving this epic journey, whether it's being Indiana Jones and choosing the right chalice. What are those journeys that people are confronted with in their real life now in this kind of modern age? We didn't have Instagram for a whole day today, and it was like the world was going to end.
Yes.
People were upset. So,
Yeah.
Do we have these types of challenges in a modern era?
Well, I think no doubt about it, and I think it kind of goes back to probably the way a lot of us, especially I know the three of us were raised, is that we were taught, yeah, you can accomplish it, but you have to put in hard work to get there, right? And I think it kind of just goes back to that concept of you can achieve your personal legend or find your treasure or whatever it is, but it isn't going to just be handed to you. You have to be willing to put in the time and the effort and the energy to do that and deal with adversity and deal with challenges. And it's how you do that that's going to ultimately set you up on that road to success.
And he talks about the beginning of a journey. When you first identify that dream, that goal, that ambition, you'll have all the beginner's luck.
Right.
His friend wants to buy, my friend wanted to buy the sheep and paid me well for it. And then the universe will turn and say, earn it, prove you deserve it. And he says, beginner's luck would no longer function. In his pursuit of the dream, he was being constantly subjected to tests of persistence and courage. So he could not be hasty. So that idea that he had to have both persistence, courage, and make it three things, patience,
right,
or it wasn't earned.
And I think it kind of goes back to that same concept we just talked about, the fate versus free will, right? The fate is the beginner's luck. Those are things that just happen to us. But the free will is, what do we do with that? What do we do with that? Those things that happen, and how do we deal with those, those challenges again that come up?
And I would almost add to that it goes back to in the beginning when he was talking to the king said to him, when you want something, all the universe will conspires to help you achieve it. And then my thought to myself was that, and we conspire against ourselves to prevent ourselves from achieving it, because even when we don't have things like the thief to take from us or the desert to cross, we set up our own mental obstacles, which is we believe to be a uniquely human trait. And I know that I think of myself that way, where a lot of times the only thing that's getting in the way of something being accomplished is, myself. Well, and Instagram.
I think so. Speaking of that, like again, going back to that, where he talks about, when you're a child, it says everybody has a treasure, right, that awaits them, and it talks about people's hearts. At a certain point, people stop to go in search of those treasures, right? So we can take treasures as whatever our goals are, or those types of things. And they say, as he's explaining it to him, he says, very few people will follow the path that is laid out for them, that path to that personal legend, right? Again, so they're not willing to put in the time or the work or whatever else. And the kid asks him, well, why is that? And he says, because people see the world as a threatening place, and they don't want to put themselves in those situations. And he says, basically, we never stop speaking out, but we begin to hope that our words aren't heard, which I thought was really, again, very deep and profound. We don't want people to suffer because they don't follow their hearts. And then the boy asks, he says, well, why don't people's hearts tell them to continue to follow that dream? And he says, because that's what makes a heart suffer the most, and hearts don't like to suffer. So again, you take back and step back from that, and you think about that. That's why a lot of people maybe never get to that whatever dream was, because again, there's the effort to get there, or the obstacles that are placed in front of them just become something that, hey, I'm not willing to put in that time or that effort or that energy.
That's one of the parts of the book that puzzles me the most. I love it about the book, but it does puzzle me because he makes love an obstacle. He makes finding your true love an obstacle, that those are two separate things, your personal legend and your true love. And people will sacrifice the personal legend for the person they love. And he has a unique, I don't want to give away too much of the book, but he has a unique way it gets handled in the book, but it's not a way that usually gets handled in real life.
Sure. Well, I was going to ask you both, you're both fathers, and you in the beginning of the book, Santiago's father had made a choice to become a family man and to provide for his family, and that meant doing things in his life that maybe he wouldn't have done were he unencumbered. And I wonder if there's another side to this book that isn't reflected, that, maybe we should write a sequel about how sometimes if you're choosing to sacrifice your personal legend, there's also a reward over there. That could be an entirely different type of reward. And maybe you don't achieve Tom Brady like greatness, but you do receive something for that sacrifice.
I think right there you just defined in a lot of ways parenthood, in a lot of ways, because I think that is parenthood. There's a ton of sacrifice in that, and there are many people, I think we probably all know them, and many stories of people that have sacrificed because of their children and because of having kids, but that at the same time, what they got out of that was so much greater. And that becomes, like I said, that their personal legend changed, and again, that's kind of that again where that free will and those choices that you make will have it. But I think you can see both sides of that. I mean, I think there's probably plenty of examples where having that child became a, something that really waylaid them. But again, for most people, I know I can speak for Jeff and myself, that the joys that we got out of being parents and that kind of stuff far outweighed any sacrifices that we made.
We weren't martyrs to things for our children. It was a
but I think that's a very valid point. Yeah.
At the Oasis, after they've passed by some tough situations in the desert. Along the way, Santiago meets an Englishman who's traveling specifically to meet the title character, the Alchemist, and the Alchemist is known to be someone who can turn any sort of metal or any sort of kind of thing into gold. That's kind of the story. If you can learn alchemy, you could become rich because you could turn, iron into gold, for example. But when they get to the Oasis where the Alchemist actually is, the Alchemist doesn't want anything to do with this Englishman who's seeking him out, really, which doesn't even seem to frustrate the Englishman too much, other than to, he's so devoted to this goal. But the Alchemist specifically seeks out Santiago, who doesn't even care that he exists. Why do you think he does that? Why does the Alchemist decide to help Santiago to achieve his personal legend? And what created the need for that relationship to push this book forward?
The Alchemist says, there's other people have come to me. They were seeking the gold of alchemy, not seeking how to live out a personal legend. They wanted the treasure of the personal legend, not the life of the personal legend. So there's a little answer there, although that's pretty enigmatic in itself. I think one of the genius moments of the simplicity of the book is when you look at Santiago and say, why does the Alchemist give so much to Santiago? Why does he allow Santiago this opportunity? You don't really have an answer you can put your finger on, but you can find something in Santiago that answers the question. And I think it's a golden moment of a simple book of, you can look in Santiago and see maybe a little something that you recognize in yourself or in people you care about, and say, oh, it's because Santiago's open-minded, or it's because Santiago's a risk taker, or because Santiago is intellectually curious. And you can find your answer in that.
I would follow that up with a question of wondering why gold? Gold throughout history has been this in-demand metal, similar to diamonds or whatever it is that we decide to put value on, but gold is kind of stuck with us throughout generations. And what is it about humans? I guess this book kind of inspired me to ask, what is it about humans that makes us need to have something we desire as opposed to just seeking out things like our personal legends?
I play English teacher again. Gold also is symbolic of wisdom and age. And even in that simplicity of making it about the gold, it has a symbolic complexity of, and I think the Alchemist is about that. This is about a quest for wisdom. Part of that wisdom, part of that knowledge is how to turn the lead to gold. But are you seeking the wisdom or are you seeking the gold?
Well, I'm more of a silver person myself, so neither. No wisdom or gold for me. The Alchemist, even the thing that I think is really interesting about the Alchemist as a character is that, and was the reason I asked that question, which is he himself doesn't see value in gold other than that he knows how to do this thing that everyone else wants to do. And he actually has this comment that he makes, which is there's only one way to learn, and it is through action. And I'm wondering if you guys agree with that statement.
Yeah, no, I would say on this one, I think for him is it's not the end goal, it's the journey, right? The journey is what teaches you. It again, and the journey can be life, your experiences, your adventures. I think that's where he sees the value in it, right? And I think that's I found it really interesting too as well. Again, just like I said, areas of the book that I kind of stopped and had to reread. And I'm not a rereader. I'll say this, but this book made me reread stuff a bunch. But he talked about that people in their pursuit of that personal legend, that the only thing that makes it impossible is the fear of failure. And I thought, wow, that's, think about that. It's such a simple concept and it's so true, but really that is at the basis of most people. Why do most people not try? Because they've already projected that, hey, I'm not going to be successful at this, right? And those people that can do that can put themselves out there. Think of how much potentially richer their experiences are in their lives are. I think like I said, so that's that journey. That's being able to put yourself out there, and that's where you're learning, right? You learn from failure. I think it's something that I know I teach in my class all the time, and we got to make mistakes so we know what we need to work on. If we knew everything, why would we even be here? So I found it really, it was, like I said, it was so simple and so simply expressed in this book that I really appreciate it. It was like, wow, this guy put this whole concept, but he put it down in like 3 words. I'm like, wow, he nailed it,
And I disagree with it a little bit in that, my father used to say, the wisest people are those who learn from other people's mistakes. They pause for effect and say, unfortunately, no one can actually do that. And I disagree with that a little bit. I think that's why we read books. I think it's
right.
why we look into, I learned about being a father from my father, but I also learned from Atticus Finch. So
yeah, role models are huge, right? Role models are massive in all of our lives and in so many ways. I think we can all figure out in our own ones, but we see that on a daily basis. People
but if
are
it's a pie chart, the big chunk of the pie is you learn through the living of your life.
So I'm wondering, is there a quote from this book that we've talked about a lot of quotes already, and I'm wondering if there's a quote in particular that you guys marked, because we usually do that resonated with you as we're kind of getting to the end of this journey.
I can go one on, like I said, I've had a bunch, but the one that really was kind of cool to me at the very end, again, it's so simple, but he says, the Alchemist says, no matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world, and normally he doesn't know it. And I just thought, wow, that is so cool that we all have some role to play in the history of this, this world we live in, but we don't even know what that is. And I just thought, wow, what a cool quote, what a deep quote, and it kind of gives us all some level of importance, I guess.
There's one quote that I just thought was hilarious, but I don't want to give away anything. But readers, if you go read The Alchemist, when you get to page 143, is my favorite quote of the whole book. But I just don't want to give away that part of the book because it's just too awesome for us to give away here. But I'm going to go back to the beginning where Santiago's thinking about, do I even embark on this journey? And he says he's stuck between my flock and my treasure. And it's Coelho's version of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But the flock is comfort. It's ritual. It's the known. It's what's working. Things are working. His life's pretty good and he's pretty content. Do I give up those things for discomfort, for adventure, for the unknown, possibly failures? And the way he phrased it, I'm stuck between my flock and my treasure. I thought that was just fantastic.
Right.
Well, and that is where the one you mentioned it earlier, but the conflict with true love comes into play, because the falling in love can be uncomfortable to an extent too. And if it's not part of your, say, personal legend, like achieving a certain goal, or maybe you give something up so your partner can pursue something and vice versa. But those types of uncomfort can also be uplifting. They can also make you stronger because someone believes in you, or that you have a partner who will help you through it. And I think that's what's really interesting about the concept of this personal legend, is that you have this path that exists if you decide to open up to it and follow it. But the fact that you can change that path means that the treasure at the end could also change. And maybe you end up realizing it without even maybe you thought you gave up on your personal legend to pursue something different, but you end up at your personal legend anyway.
So much of the book is about looking for the omens, looking for where to turn and where to zig, where to zag. And I think that fits into that. You know, my another favorite part is where they discuss the world's greatest lie. You know, the world's greatest lie is that we can't accomplish, that our lives are controlled by fate and we can't really accomplish what we dream of. And the way they describe that as the world's greatest lie, and how many forces come together to tell us that lie to the point where it becomes very comfortable to believe it.
Yeah.
And we get examples of that throughout the book.
Yeah, and the quote that I wanted to bring up was something that I thought was very relevant to me right now today, which is kind of late in the book as well, but doesn't give anything away. Although, Jeff, I'm going to ask you after the show which quote you were talking about, because there's like 3 of them on that page you mentioned.
I tried to figure out which one as well.
In my copy, it's page 135 that I'm looking at for my quote, which is, most people see the world as a threatening place, and because they do, the world turns out indeed to be a threatening place. And there's this, you know, it seems so simple and common sense that if you go looking for monsters, you will find monsters, and they can be scary, and the world can be scary. And as someone who is a admittedly news junkie, someone who punishes himself by reading every news article about everything, you can very easily fall into that trap of being frightened of the world, or of being threatened by the world, or being afraid of pursuing something you want because you see all of the potential pitfalls, and those distract you from the potential rewards.
You know, we really can project our personal legend, our dreams into the world and find our ways, or we can project our personal dragons as our terrors and demons in the world. I believe that completely. The power of a positive attitude, and certainly Jeff, their talent has helped me. Even in our career, I have at times been someone who can overreact and be quite cynical. And Jeff at times has helped me be a little more grounded and say, look at the long picture here, and help me kind of reground, rethink, and refocus what's important. So I very much appreciate that.
Well, I think, Jeff, you and I have a similar sensibility in that we don't understand why people don't just listen to us all the time, because we know what's best for them.
He says, consider the lilies of the field, and then
in the end of the book, Santiago learns that his treasure is actually back where his journey began, which is under the tree inside of the abandoned church where he first had this dream. And so the question is, why did he have to work so hard to discover that truth, that his physical treasure is there? And why was he so happy to learn that, even though he was nearly penniless? He had just been beaten almost to the end of his life, and he's far on the other side of the desert.
I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about with the gold, is that it's not necessarily about the end game, it's about the journey, right? And if the journey is worth it, then that end game is so much sweeter, right? And you'll appreciate it so much more. I mean, that's kind of what I took from it, is that you know, and I think that's important for most of us, is we sometimes get so focused on result and the final result, and we forget about the process of getting there. And you know, and I think that's a good thing for all of us sometimes, is to step back and, as they say, smell the roses.
It is one of those places where you can, as Jeff and I had an English teacher a long time ago, who was a mentor to both of us. He'd say sometimes you can see the strings of the author. So it's one of those places where you can't see a bit of the strings of the author, that we come right back to where we started, and there's the treasure. It is a bit back to a formula. It's, to me, the most disappointing part of the book. I don't mind it, but it's kind of like, oh wait, there are so many twists and turns on this adventure.
Yeah, the easy part of it is that there's this physical treasure, that there's this gold and whatever. And I almost wonder if he does that, he discredits his audience a little bit at the end by saying that, and not assuming they could understand that they didn't need a physical treasure to achieve their personal legend. And I personally hope that Santiago is excited, because he realizes not so much that there's a treasure out there, but that he has to go through a whole world of adventure to find it again, which he's already done once, and he knows he can do again. That was my hope. So, is there anything that I didn't ask you guys about today that you wanted to bring up in the book that wasn't mentioned?
No, I think you kind of nailed it without giving away too much more than we maybe already gave up. But I mean, I would highly recommend this book to anybody. I mean, honestly, for even someone that says I don't like to read, good literature or whatever else, is just try this one. It's a good story. But I think you'll be kind of blown away with like I said, the depth and the levels of this book.
And if you've got a little Weltschmerz going and the pressures of the world are heavy on your shoulders, this is a book that was just a pleasure to read and made me smile and laugh and feel good again. I'd be better if I read it while I was at Bergen.
Well, I think that's a good point to say how we feel about this book and how we feel about this beer. If we were going to rate it for the I Like Beer podcast, where does this book fall and where do these beers fall?
I would give the book a 5. There's no doubt about it. This to me is on a must-read list now for people. Like if people ask me what's a must-read, I would put this on there, which is exciting because it's not often you find a book like that. You know what I mean? And we've as we go back, and I feel like a lot of these books I maybe I wouldn't appreciate it 20, 30 years ago. I don't know. So it's kind of fun that we're reading them now. But it's a book that I'll recommend to both of, if my kids haven't already read it, I'll recommend that they read it, because I think someone at that stage of their life could get a lot from it. But I think someone even at my stage of my life, and even my parents' stage, I think could appreciate it, because it's something there for everyone. And I think the beers are really good to go along with it. So I've been enjoying both of these beers. So all in all, it's been a super successful afternoon here.
Right. I'm giving a 4.5 to the Pale Ale, 4.25 to the Helles Lager, and I'm giving a 4.75 to Paolo Coelho's The Alchemist.
Nice.
Perfect. See, and I don't rate my beers anymore because I tried to make beer and it was so hard that my wife and I almost got divorced. So I just appreciate anyone who can make a great beer. But Bergen, I think, is a brewery that I am proud is in my community, as someone who lives in Carlsbad, not just from a beer standpoint, but I think they're a great builder of community as a brewery. And as far as the book go, I do rate books, and I did rate it a 5, because I think that even if someone listened to this whole thing and got all these spoilers, which I always mean to say spoilers at the beginning and never do, I don't think it matters. The story is the journey, and that is the whole point, and it will resonate with you on a different level than it resonated with me and both of you. And so I definitely give it a 5.
It's a book I've read at least 6 times, and I find new stuff and enjoy new things and enjoy some of the old laughs again. So
I definitely have more dog-eared pages than I think any book in recent memory. And if this is why Aaron Rodgers is such a good quarterback, then I'm on board.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, thank you for letting me revisit The Alchemist, a favorite book, and letting me enjoy talking about it with 2 of my favorite people, with 2 great beers.
That's good.
Next month, it's my turn. I'm going back to the well one more time with John Steinbeck, since Cannery Row has worked out so well with a book I haven't read in over 20 years, Travels with Charlie. Steinbeck, at 58 years old, says, I'm putting some beer in the back of the truck, I'm putting in my dog, and I got a map, and I'm going to drive across America and on a quest to find out what America really is now. What's America up to? Who are Americans? And looking forward to talking about that with you 2.
Well, that's a great book for me, because I might be traveling across America.
You're on a
over the
road
next
trip
month.
pretty soon. Yeah.
So I will hopefully be able to read this book along the way.
Until then.
Very good. I'm looking forward to my pre-ordered copy of Future Eli and Jane. I got that before they sold out.
I was real excited. I've never, pre-orders don't sell out, Jeff.
I know, I'm aware of that, but
I
I'm
appreciate.
still going to stick to that.
I appreciate the effort. Here's the thing is I had a lot of feedback on that. I was charging a little bit more for an autographed copy and a personalized copy. And what I found is people would rather pay less for the autographed copies than just for the plain copies. So that'll probably be coming here in the future.
I just figured I'll bring it to when we're drinking at Bergeon, and I'll just slip it in front of you, and after 2 or 3 beers, you'll sign it.
Sounds like a plan.
No, I'm looking forward to it because my daughter stole my autographed one. It's on her bookshelf up in college up in Canada, so she's waiting for the sequel to it. She enjoyed the book so much, the first one, she can't wait for the second one as well. So she's having matching autographed copies there.
I definitely appreciate all the support, guys, and
Yeah.
you'll have as many copies as you would like from me.
Until next month, cheers.
Cheers.